Hello and welcome to our program Newsroom. We're coming to you live from Islamabad and I'm Sharmeen Ali. In recent developments, two Pakistani High Commission officials in New Delhi were expelled from India, and this is due to allegations put by India on these High Commission officials of espionage, and that claim has been refuted by the Pakistani Foreign Office as false and unsubstantiated. And this is during all the previous build-up in the vitriol that has been going on by the Indian government against Pakistan of trying to spread coronavirus in their country and trying to infiltrate and harboring terror training camps. Is just part of all of that similar rhetoric and animosity that we're seeing in the recent weeks and months from our neighboring country, India. The Foreign Office has also said that detention of these two officials goes against the norms and the Vienna Convention, which protects diplomats serving in other countries. So we'll be talking about that on our program today. Another unfortunate development between India and Pakistan and their relations. Also, another very, very concerning issue that everybody's seeing all over their television screens is the state of the situation in the United States, where the riots erupting after the killing of George Floyd by a police officer have spread all over the country. The White House was also there were clashes that erupted outside there while President Trump was present over there. And many of the cities we're seeing looting and rioting going on, clashes between rioters and the police. A state of emergency has been declared in several states and cities. And at the same time, we're also seeing images of some compassion in some areas where police officers are actually bending their knee and trying to be compassionate with protesters, particularly in the case of Miami, Florida, which was very heartening to see. Also, the National Coordination Committee is to meet today under Prime Minister Imran Khan to review the coronavirus situation in Pakistan. Now, coronavirus cases are reaching a new level in Pakistan, where just yesterday 3,000 new cases were detected in Pakistan and 88 new deaths. And this is showing a spike in cases after the lockdown was lifted due to economic considerations, and now Pakistan has 72,460 cases and 1,543 deaths so far. We'll be talking about this situation as well on our program. And to begin with, the expulsion of two High Commission officials of Pakistan by Indian authorities. We have with us online Raja Kaisar, who's an international affairs expert. Thank you, Raja Kaisar, for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Right, Raja Kaisar, now the expulsion of these two diplomats from the from the Pakistani High Commission in India. We've seen similar expulsions in Pakistan when certain staff of the Indian High Commission here were expelled a couple of years ago. But in this case, they actually detained these officers as these High Commission officials, which is contrary to the Vienna Convention, according to our Foreign Office.
Well, Sharmeen, it is a blatant violation of Vienna Convention, which gives protection to diplomats. And what is happening in India is very uncharacteristic, rather very unfortunate, because Modi's India is unfamiliar to all diplomatic norms and the established ethos which are adhered across the globe. So the way they are reacting right now, I mean, they are just scapegoating Pakistan for rather a very embarrassing situation which has developed in India amidst their standoff with China. So, but this is what Modi government had always been doing. They actually try to distract their people's attention towards Pakistan. And Pakistan, I mean, this is something which is not very unbecoming from Modi government. Reason being, if you see that they cannot talk anything about except Muslims, except Pakistan, and except Ram Mandir. So these are the three issues over which BJP's politics it feeds upon. So it is not something which is very unprecedented, or it is not something which one can call as a surprise, because as I said earlier, that this kind of jingoism, this kind of parochial mentality, and this kind of violation of the international norms and values is becoming a ubiquitous phenomena in India. So
Right.
you might expect some kind of another political stunt from BJP's government in coming days, because the kind of embarrassment which they have amassed in their apparent standoff with China, they are likely to settle that with some kind of adventure with Pakistan, and this is something which is on the cards, and which definitely our security forces, they must be taking very seriously, and they had given a befitting response when Indians they tried to do a limited incursion last year in February. So I'm rather very hopeful and sure about the fact that if they will try to do any kind of adventure, our operational preparedness of our security forces, it is going to be a tough challenge for them. So this a possibility of a false flag or anything which cannot be apparently ruled out. So now coming to this very particular development of expelling diplomats, it is symptomatic of the fact that the BJP's government, it is apparently led by a Hindu jingoist. It is a proto-fascist regime which is right now ruling India, and this regime is completely in violation with all the legal niceties of all the legal underpinnings. The way they did that, the way they did it in the case of abolishing the abolition of this Article 370, and the way now they are trying to deal with Pakistan. So it is something which is grossly illegal. It is patently something which is not acceptable. So I think Modi's India is something which should be dealt very cautiously and seriously, because such kind of jingoist attitude, such kind of Hindu militant nationalist mindset can only be countered by ensuring a very cautious behavior, and keeping all our options intact.
Right. We're seeing some very ridiculous claims at times by the Indian authorities. For example, the border security force claimed to catch a pigeon that they thought was spying. Meanwhile, Pakistan is actually shooting down their spy quadcopters, and which is actually proof that they are carrying out espionage within Pakistan.
Indians at times they make a farce. They actually make themselves as a mocking stock. So this is what I mean. Spying pigeon, and it is not happening for the first time. They have done it in past as well. And even if you see that their mainstream media is also propagating that it is Pakistan which is sending the swarms of the locusts, trained locusts to India. So this is the level of the sensibility. This is the level of cognizance right now in India, that their top-notch, profoundly listened anchor, I mean, who is very famous for his incendiary rhetoric. So he is saying that Pakistan is sending terrorist locusts to India. So what you can expect from Indians in this given situation, in this given matrix? They are likely to behave with more kind of vitriolic hate, with more kind of bellicosity. They are likely to reciprocate nothing for Pakistan, and this is what Pakistan should be sure of, and Pakistan should not be expecting any good from Indian side. So they are
Right.
likely, as I said, that they would try to square the matrix by putting some kind of this hawks onto side of Pakistan, just to equate, or just to to be on to the safer side, because they are facing a lot of domestic backlash apparently on this China's front, because the kind of docility and the kind of submissiveness their troops they have demonstrated on their border with China, it is something which is likely to impinge them a lot. So this is what is happening right now, and this is I'm sure that our policymakers, foreign affairs, our defense security forces, they must be taking close notes. They must be taking very cautious notes of this situation and closely monitoring it. And if Indians they would try to do any kind of limited incursion or any kind of adventure, they would be given a befitting response.
Right. According to the Foreign Office statement, they said that we condemn the detention and torture as well as threatening and pressuring of the diplomatic officials to accept false charges. Now, these officials were actually detained and tortured.
This is very serious allegation, and this is what Pakistan should take very seriously to all the concerned quarters, and they should be informed about India's blatant misuse of this and and violation of this Vienna Convention. This is not permissible under any circumstances, and this is something which is very condemnable. This is something which is very egregious, which they have committed, and I think Pakistan should approach all the relevant offices, all the relevant institutions, including, I mean, the International Court of Justice and all those concerned quarters who are responsible for vanguarding international law, international norms, and who uphold them. So it is not something which can be spared. And Indians, they should not be let go on this thing, because after this it would be rather giving them a carte blanche to do anything in the future as well. So this time it should be given.
Right. Stay with us online, please, Raja Kesar. We've also got joining us Air Vice Marshal Ikramullah Bhatti, who is a senior analyst. Thank you for joining us on our program. Ikramullah Bhatti Sahab, now the Foreign Office has said regarding the detention and expulsion of two diplomats in India, Pakistani diplomats, that this Indian move was accompanied by a negative pre-planned and orchestrated media campaign which is part of persistent anti-Pakistan propaganda. Your views on this, sir?
Well, we have a long history of such incidents happening to Pakistani diplomats in India. And of course, at the diplomatic level, these incidents do get reciprocated, and we'll see in coming days that there will be a few Indian diplomats who will be, handled in the same manner. But unfortunately, this happens in an environment where we have the spread of this pandemic. Then we have issues which is already boiling in the region. We already have a lockdown in Kashmir for the last nearly 10 months. We have a very strong wave of hatred against minorities in India, especially against Muslims. And then we have now a situation in Nepal. We have a situation in Ladakh. And we already have a situation with Bangladesh, that of India, wherein because of the Citizen Amendment Bill, they have a large number of Bangladeshi or origin Muslims living in the border area of Bangladesh in India, who are under the threat of being evicted from there and sent back to Bangladesh. So in this environment, we have this now initiative taken by India against Pakistani diplomats. We have been seeing this, that when India, whenever they come across a situation where they are coming in the world limelight from the international media or international institutions like UNO, human rights institutions, then they invariably end up doing one incident or the other wherein they want to divert the attention, not that of the world media, but also maybe domestic audience. And I think it is in the line with the same mindset that they have, and they've undertaken this activity, and essentially to again divert the attention of the world and their own people, and again blame Pakistan for their problems, and consider themselves free of any wrongdoing.
Right. Raja Kesar, coming back to you now, the internal pressure that the Indian government is facing with their handling of the coronavirus situation, and also prior to coronavirus, there was all the communal tensions and the riots, etc. And then we also saw that, the public, their vote bank is not very satisfied with their economic performance either of the BJP. So all of this, like Air Vice Marshal Sahab just said, is to divert attention from all of that. In your opinion, do you think this is going to work with the public in India? Raja Kesar, we're having difficulty connecting back with him. Air Vice Marshal Saab, I'd like to ask you now, the problems in Indian occupied Kashmir, we've seen those also. They're in a situation where, other than the human rights violations, we see people being detained, the journalists and being detained. But at the same time, we also saw Indian journalists from Indian occupied Kashmir winning Pulitzer Prizes. And also we're seeing that the world is becoming cognizant of this situation there. So how effective will this campaign against Pakistan, blaming constantly, how effective do you think this will be with their own public and internationally?
Well, I think now, after a long time, now that this strategy of the Indians has been going on, the world is now coming to realize that all this is a pre-programmed and engineered strategy wherein the Indians want to cover up their misdeeds and the atrocities that they're inflicting on innocent Kashmiris and keep the world ignorant or hide their misdeeds in Kashmir. And that is why we see that in several reports, it is now coming, especially from the UN and even from the US administration, that wherein they have started to find faults with Indian policy, wherein they are accusing the Indians of finding them at fault vis-a-vis their treatment of minorities, especially the Muslims. And even within India, we've seen now voices are being heard wherein they've started to criticize the way the minorities are being treated in India. And so I think now it's time for the Indian government of BJP with RSS mindset that their policy of oppressing the minorities and trying to create an India only for Hindus is not going to work. And there is the world is increasingly becoming aware, and we have especially seen from Middle East, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, strong objections have come. And unfortunately, we also see that the Indians have lately passed a law in which they want to change the demographic composition of the occupied territory, and which means that they are eventually preparing for a situation wherein even if they hold a plebiscite, they hope to win it because of the changed demographic ratios. And again, that again is against the established UN principles and laws, wherein they cannot do that in an occupied territory. So I think the Indians are going to be found again on the wrong foot, and there is going to be a lot of objections and criticism, both domestic as well as international. And the Indians will not be able to fool the world, or and consider that they'll get away with it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on our program, Air Vice Marshal Ikramullah Bhatti, Senior Analyst. Moving on to the situation in the United States, an unprecedented situation where we're seeing several cities all over the United States under curfew due to the riots that have erupted due to the death of George Floyd, who was killed by a policeman under detention. This was, as everybody saw, a very, very disturbing scene and unnecessary use of force by a police officer, and now we're seeing clashes between the public and the police all over the United States, and this is unprecedented in the sense that we haven't seen this at such a gravity. The situation is so extreme. We've seen riots in LA and different parts of the United States before due to similar killings and shootings of people of color in the United States. However, this time it seems to have spread all over the country, and it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon until some concrete action is taken by the authorities over there. To discuss this, we're going to be talking to Raja Faisal, who's a journalist. Thank you, Raja Faisal, for joining us on our program. Raja Faisal, thank you for joining us on our program. The clashes that we're seeing in the United States, now we're seeing this outside the White House as well, and these are things that there's tear gas used outside the White House. Different cities have been put under pressure. This is something that none of us have seen at this large extent all over the United States before.
You are very right, Sharmeen, and we have seen these sort of cases so many times in USA that the blacks, they have been victimized throughout their history, and now this thing happening, never we saw was that somebody trying to get into White House. I think this is just because the President Trump, he stated uh, in his statement, he said that vicious dogs would be used to stop the protesters, which actually reminded people of the old days when the racial abuse was to such extent that police used to use the dogs against a black minority. And I think that's why the magnitude of these protests and riots is to such an extent never saw before.
Right, and President Trump had to be rushed to an underground bunker with his family, which usually happens in the case of a terrorist attack or a threat to their life in the White House. This is again something very, very unprecedented because these are United States citizens protesting for their rights.
True. And one thing I want to just highlight here from George Stinney in 1944, what happened was that this teenage guy, he was convicted unlawfully, and he was, electric shocked unlawfully. And then later on, it was proven that he wasn't guilty, he was innocent. And that teenage boy was called George. And now we have another George, George Floyd in 2020, and we are living in 2020, and system remains the same. The justice system, the police system, which they had in US for the black minority and for the colored minority, I should say, back in 1944, it remains same in 2020. That's what is actually bothering people, and people are coming on the streets and everywhere. And in several states, they have actually literally locked the states down. And one very important thing is that mostly where peaceful protests are happening, yes, there are few of the protests which are taking place just because of riots. And them riots, they include burning the properties, and looting is involved as well. But coming back to President Trump's getting into bunker, I think this is just because that people, they were standing and protesting in front of White House for nearly a week now. And yes, they had fears that at some certain point they would come forward and they would break the barriers and they would try to enter in the White House. That's why they just wanted to make sure that president and his family, they are safe, and they were taken to the bunkers. And yes, last night, a few of the protesters, they did try to cross the barriers, and to some extent they did manage to get in there. And they vandalized a few of the walls of White House, which is reminding us that this is the first. Previously, what used to happen was that in America, if these sort of things they occurred, then the leadership on the top, I'm talking about the president, they used to be very responsible. They used to take it up as very responsible president. But this time around, it's not happening. Even president's advisor, he said that all police is not the same. Yes, it is true. The police is not the same, but the system remains the same. system. It's not about the police. It's about the system that allows police to create these kind of situations. So that's what is
Right.
happening, and I think people on the roads, they are demanding change, a real change in the police and in the social system of US. And I think this is very important. And few of the protesters, they even were carrying placards calling for Chinese to come into US to save them. That
Right.
is, we've never seen this before.
We haven't seen this before, absolutely, Raja Faisal. And also, this is mainly a clash between the protesters. I wouldn't call them rioters, they're protesters versus the police. Because we're seeing police precincts being burned down, the one that had the officer who was responsible for the death of George Floyd. And this is something between the African American community, people of color, but mostly African American people in the United States versus the police. Because having lived in the United States, I've been pulled over, I've gotten a ticket, I've never felt threatened by the police there. However, it's a completely different scenario for people who are African Americans over there, because they actually have to fear for their lives that something extreme will be done to them. They give out messages like, don't put your hands in your pockets, because they're right away perceived as dangerous. Someone like me would not maybe be perceived as dangerous or whatever, but they would. And even Mayor Bloomberg, during his tenure as mayor in New York City, he had this stop and frisk policy, which was aimed particularly at African Americans. There's so many discriminatory things that the police do over there with this particular community. And this is now them sort of rising up and saying enough is enough.
Shameen, you have highlighted an excellent point. Yes, you were stopped and you were ticketed, but nothing happened to you. But still, I mean, me and you can already be considered in the society of US. We can be considered as lesser human beings. That's what is apparent from whatever is going on in US. And one very important thing I want to highlight here, Shameen, we need to look into the culture of US, especially the Hollywood culture. In the Hollywood culture, what happens is that colored people, especially the black people, African Americans, they are, portrayed as gangsters. They are portrayed as someone who uses drugs or sells drugs, or always carries guns. And as you have mentioned, like, putting hands in their pockets, and it's like, trying to hide something, and they are the looters. So this kind of culture and this kind of stereotyping, I think it is quite dangerous, very dangerous. And I think Hollywood, they need to think about it as well. I mean, always trying to showing that blacks are the ones who are the criminals. It's wrong. It's wrong. And I think this is what is injecting hate uh, in especially the white people against the black. So
Right.
this is
In the
quite.
United States, I've personally, while living there or growing up there, I personally felt that the police were there to make us feel safer, and they did. They always made us feel safer. However, that experience is not the same for African Americans. You repeatedly hear stories by them. For example, somebody living in the Bronx, who's taking night classes somewhere because they work in the daytime. An African American gentleman, he said that he gets stopped and repeatedly harassed by the police. Where you going, and prove that you're a student, etc., etc. Now that wouldn't happen to somebody like me, or a female. It's usually the males, and particularly if they're not from that community. So they have to all the time be on guard with everything they do in their way of life, and it's actually very painful for them. And Martin Luther King said, riots are the voice of the unheard. Your comment on this, please.
True, that's very true. When they are not being heard, when they are not being, their words are not being heard, of course they have to come out. I mean, this is not the first time, and I'm I'm afraid this won't be the last time until the system is fully changed. And we have, several examples of the past that same thing was getting repeated. I mean, what used to happen was that whenever an incident takes place, they, first of all, they start talking on the media, then they start protesting about it, then it gets into the riots, and then there are promises which come from the administration side, and then everything calms down, and everyone starts putting flowers on the place where it took place, and everything goes back to normal, and system never changes. I think this time around they really need to think about it, that they have to change the system. It's like yesterday I was watching one of the footages. I mean, there were two colored there was a colored couple in one of the vehicles. They were just passing by one of the place which got burned, one of the properties, business properties of somebody, and police stopped them. They stopped. Police thought that they were the looters, and they were going, they were running away from there. But later on, what was found, that both of them, they were innocent students of the college, nearby colleges, and they were merely in their early 20s or late 19s, and they were used. I mean, police used teaser guns on them. Can you believe that? Just because of
Right.
their color. And one of the
Right.
one of the white boy, he actually has actually given a statement. Um, he has said that similar kind of situation was developed around me, and he personally said it, that I think I was safe just because of one reason, and that was my skin. If I was any darker, they would have done the same thing to me as well.
Well, yeah, the good sign that we're seeing here is that there are a lot of white protesters as well. You're seeing them show solidarity with the African Americans, because everybody's been hurt and upset by this incident. And even down to the fact that Mayor Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, his own daughter was part of the riots and she was arrested as well. So you're seeing all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds coming out to support the community of African Americans right now.
True. Shameen, I think everyone is sick and tired of this system. The
Yeah.
system, the police system they are going through. It's terrible. And there are several examples. And that's why people are coming out. People just want to end this, because that's why they are coming out, and that's why so many of the mayors of different cities, majority of them Democrats, they are voicing against it. And even the police chief of Minneapolis, he has stated, he has condemned it, and he has said that the policemen who were actually standing around that policeman, trying to secure him, trying to conduct whatever he was trying to conduct, they were securing him. He said they are accomplice to it. They are they have actually played their part in this criminal activity, so they would be charged as well. So
Yes.
I think things are moving towards the positive side, and we can only hope that the things get better, because things are very
Right.
worse right now. Us.
Right. Absolutely. You had mentioned the remarks by police officers. We're seeing a lot of police officers all over the United States speaking up against this particular act. Normally, what you saw in the past is police officers tend to protect their own, which has been a part of that system. And that is one thing that's very encouraging. However, this racism, particularly against African Americans, it then extends to the immigrant community, Mexicans, anybody of color, and then it then later extended towards Islamophobia after 9/11. But particularly with the African American community, it's systemic, because the neighborhoods in which a lot of these people live in, they're marginalized, the level of education they get, the opportunities they get, that is something it needs to be sorted out from its roots.
Shameen, it's a very good point, and the reason one can only think of is that uh, just till last century, I mean, these people, they were being considered as not even human beings. They were considered as different creatures by the people of US. I mean, generations after generations. Of course, they were treated as slaves because they were taken as slaves from African countries, and they were taken to US, and they were treated as slaves, but not human beings. They hadn't had a right to vote. They hadn't had a right to study. They hadn't had a right to anything. So that's what is very important. I mean, very early last century, I mean, that's when they started thinking about them, that they are human beings as well. And if they allowed them into studies, then not to that extent that actually, tries to make them, like, compete with them, because they were considered as someone who can never compete them because they are lesser human beings. So this thing is deep rooted. This racism is deep rooted in US society, USA's society. So I think it needs to go now. It needs to go. It's 21st century, 2020 we're talking about.
Right. Absolutely. It needs to go. I think the entire world is united in this, that this systemic racism, whether it be in the United States, Europe, or the rest of the world, and even culturally, whether it's in our society where we look at somebody who's different due to their skin color or any other reason, it has to go, because this is something that requires a lot of introspection, that how racist is our mindset, how much is it in our culture and
I mean,
society, and we
I
really need
mean,
to have a
one
hard
one
look at
very
that.
important one very
Yes,
important thing I mention here is that Hollywood really need to think about it. There are so many people, black people, I would say, that they are heroes. They have done wonders. Why can't they make movies on them rather than making
absolutely.
movies on gangsters and these sort of things? I mean, they need to think about it. They need to highlight the good factor rather than the negative factors.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Raja Faisal, thank you so much for joining us on our program Newsroom today. And now the latest situation with the COVID-19 cases in Pakistan, a huge cause for concern right now due to the fact that after the lifting of the lockdown and then subsequent the Eid holidays and all the Eid shopping, people came out into the markets and bazaars, and we're seeing a sudden spike in cases, in coronavirus confirmed cases. Now Pakistan officially has 72,460 cases as of today, and 1,543 confirmed deaths due to coronavirus. The provinces which are affected the most are Sindh with 27,360 cases, and followed by Punjab, which has 25,056 cases. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has 9,540 cases. Balochistan has 4,193 cases. And Islamabad, the capital territory, has 2,418 cases. Now, as of yesterday, Pakistan saw its highest spike in cases, which was 3,000 people were infected yesterday alone. These are confirmed cases. We don't know about the unconfirmed ones, people who are not going to get tested, etc., who are just quarantining at home when they have symptoms. So 3,000 confirmed new cases yesterday, and 88 confirmed deaths due to coronavirus took place yesterday. This is a big cause of concern for Pakistani authorities, that what needs to be done now in order to curb these cases. The special advisor to the Prime Minister for Health, Dr. Zafar Mirza, did say yesterday that it's mandatory now going forward to wear masks in public places such as offices and marketplaces, etc. It will be fined. Right. We're going to now go to our guests and have a discussion about this. We have Qazi Ahmed Akbar, who's leader of PPI. Thank you so much for joining us on our program.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much.
The recent spike in coronavirus cases, can you please just give a bit of your thoughts on this, sir? And what do you think now going forward is going to be the plan of action by the government after today's National Coordination Committee meeting?
Well, actually, the basics that we will be considering in the NCCAs, and already NCOC has given their recommendations in this regard, and it's more about opening up further for the economy. And people, maybe there's a class of people who are expecting that we'll be moving towards a strict lockdown, but I don't think so that the government is thinking on those lines. Basically, the basic attempt is to make sure that the facilities that we have, the medical facilities, the ventilators, the number of ventilators that we have is enough to cater for the current situation. And studying the graphs and making the analysis, the government thinks, and we are very positive about it, that it is not going to create a lot of burden on the medical system itself. So the government is now considering more towards the economic side, and at the same time we'll be concentrating on the social distancing. As you must have read today that government has already made mandatory the wearing of masks, and social distancing and SOPs will be strictly adhered to, and then the government is going to announce certain fines on that also. So the basic agenda is to implement the SOPs and move towards opening up simultaneously.
Right. We're hearing about a lot of cases I can speak about in Islamabad where people are getting severely affected by symptoms of coronavirus, and yet they're not being able to get admitted into any hospital. People are saying that all the hospital beds are full. So in such a situation, if there is a strain on the healthcare system, there's nowhere for a person to go, what should they do?
As of today, when I talk to you, the number of ventilators that are currently being utilized by the corona patients is hardly 17%. So I don't really agree with this fact. There are rumors that there's a lack of hospital beds, because if I tell you in Punjab, we have the capacity of minimum 1,000 beds in each district. And when you talk of big districts like Multan and Lahore, then we're talking of figures around 1,800 to 2,000 and sometimes more than that also. So I don't see much of a shortage of beds also. Yes, in Islamabad, we might face certain difficulties because Islamabad itself, the PIMS hospital and the polyclinic and these hospitals are already under stress, even when COVID was not here. So yes, in Islamabad, the situation is a bit grim. But if we talk of other provinces, I assure you that the situation is pretty under control.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on our program. That was Qazi Ahmed Akbar, who's one of the PTI leaders. So the coronavirus situation in Pakistan reaching a new height, new level of cases. Today, the National Coordination Committee is to meet under Prime Minister Imran Khan and decide what to happen going forward. And as of now, we know that wearing of masks is mandatory in public places such as marketplaces and offices, which will be enforced through fines. So everybody is required to wear a mask. It's extremely important to do that so that we don't infect other people. Wearing a mask, basically, you're treating yourself as if you have the virus so that you don't spread it to other people. So very important to follow the government SOPs right now to keep ourselves and other people safe in Pakistan. And let's hope that this situation does get contained and under control going forward. Thank you for joining us on Newsroom. That's all the time we have for our program today. We'll see you next time.